It's good to see you again. Several of you have been customers in the past, and I sincerely appreciate that. And I'm always here to help in any way I can, and that's my phone number there for anything bee related. But for those of you that know me, I do wear two hats. Most days of the week, I am the cotton specialist with NC State University, and that's what finances this addiction to bees that I have. And something obviously needs to be financing it. So I went commercial a few years ago, probably 6 years ago now. I've been keeping bees with my daddy for going on 20 years, maybe 18, 20 years now. More or less as a hobbyist, and you know, if he made honey, great. If he didn't worry about it. But a couple of years ago, I decided to take the plunge into the commercial side, and just a long story short, I used to be cotton specialist at the University of Georgia, and right out of graduate school, that was my first career. And a boy that he didn't really work for me, but he was always hanging around the other student workers that did. He was a college kid at the time, but he went on to get his master's in entomology, was working with John Deere in Tifton, Georgia, and they bought Rossman Apiaries. And since he had bee experience, they put him in charge of it. So this kid that used to kind of sort of work for me now runs Rossman Apiaries, and that was my connection to get into reselling packages and things of that nature. So we do sell roughly 100, 120 packages every spring, usually in late March. I make all my own woodenware. Everything that I sell, I use myself. I'm not a very good salesperson at all, so I cannot really talk about anything if I'm not willing to use it myself. Now we'll change designs on, you know, little subtleties and things from year to year in our hive designs and things like that. I mean, they're standard. Most of it's going to be 10 frame Langstroth hives. But there are little things that we do different, try new things, and if we don't like something, we take it off the website. All right, so that's just how we do it. Everything that I offer, we use in our own apiary. My apiary now is about 125 colonies as of a couple weeks ago. This time of year, it kind of changes every week. You know, you lose some, you'll have to requeen some, mating newts come back in, that kind of thing, which we're winding that down now. I do raise my own queens. I source queens from all over though. I've bought queens from all over the country. You name it, the odds are I've gotten a queen from them, or at least tried them. But I do like to raise my own queens, and as I said earlier, most of mine end up in newts that'll be for sale next year. But there's a place, I'm a bear hunter as well, and there's a place way down east that's just isolated. It's a swamp. It's about 2 miles long that we have access to. And it's just got good, I'm not gonna call them wild, but they're surviving bees because there's no colonies. You can see 5 miles all the way around you, and there's nobody there. So they're wild to a sort. They're probably survivors, but they're very good queens. And I put up swarm traps every year and always catch a few. And what I'll do is take those queens, a lot of that wax I just melt down, but I'll take the queens, introduce them to a split newt and raise them from there. And that tends to be what I graft from to raise my own queens. And I found that to be successful. They're just a good hardy bee. A few of them are a little on the testy side, at least in a swarm like that, but I do like those queens for grafting. We do some commercial pollination for your cucurbit growers, melons, cucumbers, things like that, squash and pumpkins, what have you. And we do sell honey, most of which is going to be cotton honey, which I'll talk about tonight. We're getting a little bit bigger into the honey side of it. We'll just see how that goes. But I usually like to start with this slide, and several of you may have seen my presentation before, but I have updated it several times over the past couple of years. But I usually like to start with this one, because this is one of the bee yards I have. And this is up in Northampton County. All right, that's where I was born and raised time of year, but in the wintertime, they're all going to be consolidated back into Northampton County. And I show this because it illustrates that I'm pretty much surrounded by crop acres. All right, and that can be any number of crops. You know, most years we're going to have cotton at least on a third of it, sometimes all the way around us. And I like that. Now that scares some people because of that dirty word insecticide. All right, that does tend to scare people. But there is a way to do it, and where we can all live and benefit from each other. The farmers benefit, and we can certainly benefit off of their crops in many cases. This year, I had kind of where I'm standing relative to this picture, so kind of behind it, was Irish potatoes. And it's through one company they contract out with different farmers that have irrigation. And every spray, they do it every Monday, or at least this farm they did, every Monday, every spray they make is with an airplane. So I kind of cringed when I heard that a little bit. 0 problems and the best spring crop of honey I've ever had. 0 problems at all. And they weren't 100 yards away from it with an airplane spraying. So this is cotton. This is a different farm I take my honey hive to that I'm going to use to make cotton honey. This is irrigated cotton. I do that for a reason, and that helps, the irrigation helps a continuation of the bloom period for longer in the season. It can get cut short real easy from dry conditions. So I prefer it to be on irrigated cotton if we can help it. And this farm here is about 250 acres, and usually it's going to be all cotton. Sometimes every couple of years you'll see maybe 100 acres of it go to peanuts. Rarely is it corn. Peanuts don't offer us a whole lot other than pollen. They will gather quite a bit of pollen when you have peanuts around. All right, so cotton at the end of the season, you've all seen it in the fields most likely. And the reason I show this picture is a cotton fiber is one of the very few examples of a single cell that you can see with the naked eye. And it's made up almost entirely of cellulose. So if you remember back to high school chemistry, words that end in ose are what? Carbohydrates, which are also sugar. That's right. So I show this to just illustrate how much sugar is being produced per acre. All right, so we harvest just the lint. We separate that from the seed through the ginning process. And we hope at least to make 1,000 pounds of just lint. Sometimes it can be upwards of 2,000 pounds in one of those home run kind of years. So that's a lot of sugar per acre being produced by a cotton crop. So that's how much is being produced by the leaves and how much sugar is moving up and down the plant. Now, not all of that, of course, is going to be accessible to honeybees, but it is a carbohydrate producing machine, if you will. All right, so most folks don't realize what cotton will do in its natural environment. It is an indeterminate plant and it's a perennial. All right, it's indeterminate in that it can grow vegetatively and reproductively at the same time. And that's an advantage to us as beekeepers because that can ensure a long bloom period, potentially. Whereas something like corn, or other crops too, that kind of bloom instantaneously and then it's over with. All right, but in its natural environment, you won't see this here because we have cool temperatures and a killing frost. And in its natural environment, it will keep right on growing. And that plant there is in excess of 20 feet tall. You never see that in North Carolina. The only place in the U.S., well, 2 places you can find it, would be along the Mexico border. All right, incidentally, that's the last place we have the boll weevil. Still exists. And I think 3 counties along the Mexico border, because historically they do not have a killing fruit. And there they have wild cottons that grow in people's flower beds. I've seen a picture of a real big plant growing out of a crack in the concrete of a bridge. I mean, so the way we can annihilate and eradicate the boll weevil is they have to have cotton to feed on to complete their life cycle. If they do not have cotton, they will not complete their life cycle. So here we can isolate them to a cotton field. Down there, when you have cotton that's not in fields, it's in ditches and roadsides and things like that, you can't isolate them. So that's the only reason we still have the boll weevil in the U.S. The other place you can find it, plant this tall, would be somewhere like Hawaii, somewhere that's somewhat tropical and doesn't have a killing tree. All right, so for us as beekeepers, our interest in the cotton plant begins at what we call the 7 to 8 leaf stage. It's going to be about a foot tall at that time. Now, the bees are not really going to be working cotton at that point, but at this point in time, this is when the first fruit appear. They're going to be real tiny. That is called a square. Don't ask me why. It looks nothing at all like a square. But somebody coined that term years ago, and that's part of the official terminology. So that is a cotton square, which is the floral bud and contains the floral bud for the flower that will come later. So these leafy structures on the outside, there should be 3 of them. If there are 4, we see that every now and then, but 4 means problems for the grower. It means we're going to lose that fruit. We don't really know why that happens, other than it seems to be temperature driven. But in most cases, all we hope to see is 3 leafy structures. We call those bracts, and that kind of protects that floral bud. So if you peel back those bracts, you can see that floral bud in there developing, and that is of interest to us as beekeepers. Now, when a bloom opens, the day it opens, it should be around 60 days after we plant it, okay? So you can kind of time when it may be blooming based on when you plant it, assuming you planted it in good conditions and good moisture and that kind of thing. The day it opens, it'll be white. The very next day, it will be pink. Following day, it'll be dead, okay? I show this so you can see the pollen anthers inside of a bloom. Oddly enough, honeybees don't care for cotton pollen. They will use it if they happen to get it on them. But they really don't have much interest in it because the pollen grains of cotton tend to be very large and sticky, and they have difficulty packing that into pollen sacs. Bumblebees, all kinds of other bees you'll see inside that bloom, but a honeybee is actually very rare to see them inside of a bloom. So what's interesting enough is the nectaries in the cotton bloom are not in the bloom. They're underneath it. And I'll show you what one looks like. So a honeybee really has no interest in going inside of a cotton bloom. A bumblebee might, but a honeybee doesn't. Now, the day that bloom opens, it's a white bloom, okay? That's the day it's going to primarily bleed nectar out of those nectaries, which are right there, and right there you can see that little teardrop. And I don't recommend you doing this because you need to kind of know your grower and know when something's been sprayed. But when I go through a cotton field, I will pick those off and just lick the bottom of them because it's really, really sweet. Very high in glucose. The ratio of glucose to other sugars is higher in cotton, and cotton honey is known to crystallize for that reason. There are ways to prevent that or even reverse it, but cotton honey will crystallize, but it's a good nectar source the day that bloom opens. I have seen it bleed a little nectar the day before it will open, and sometimes a little bit the day after, but not much. The primary nectar flow is going to be the day that bloom opens. Now, there is another nectary in some flowers. Not all flowers have them, but if you peel back those bracts and look at the very junction of where 2 bracts meet, at the base of that floral bud, there's another little nectary there that appears sometimes. A lot of times I'll see other types of insects in there trying to mess with those. Every now and then you'll see a honeybee kind of work its way between those bracts. It's somewhat open at the base of those bracts, so every now and then they can kind of get their heads in there and get a little bit of it, but in most cases I don't see honeybees really working those, and there's not many of them out there for whatever reason. So the day after it blooms, it'll turn pink. So if you ride by a cotton field, you should see a mixture of white and pink bloom, okay? And that just means when it blooms. If it's pink, then that means it bloomed yesterday. If it's white, it's been blooming today, okay? That's the only difference. And by day 3, sometimes day 4, it starts to wither away. We call that a bloom tag at that point. And we lose interest in it. It's good for the grower, but as a beekeeper, that bloom has kind of served its purpose already. There's not going to be much nectar coming out of those nectaries at that point. But it will start developing the bowl. All right, so if you peel back that bloom tag, you'll see a little tiny cotton bowl develop right below it. Here's just fast forward about another 10 days. Okay, so it grows fairly quickly. It takes about somewhere between 50 and 70 days to fully mature. But it grows very quickly initially. And even a young bowl like that, you can peel it open and see the fiber developing. So a cotton, the fiber develops from the seed itself. And there'll be 4 compartments inside a cotton bowl. All right, we call those locks. Kind of, if you were to peel one out, it looks like a slice of an orange or something like that. And it's real wet and a lot of sugar inside there. All right. So just to recap, when we see first square, that's going to be on a plant about 1 foot tall. It's got 8 true leaves on it. That's usually going to be about 35 days after we plant, sometimes a little later. 3 weeks later, from that first square, it will become a white bloom. That bloom will open. And then very quickly, if fertilization was successful, that bloom will wither down, and from there on, it's a developing cotton boll. And again, about 50 to 60 days after, 50 to 70 days after it blooms is when it matures and starts to crack open. So far we've only talked about one bloom on the plant. Well, a cotton plant's got several blooms on it, all at the same time. It's going to start at the bottom of the plant. So at each branch that you see here, we call that a node, all right? So on each node, you're going to have a main stem leaf and then a branch, or reproductive branch, okay? So that's going to set various amounts of fruit on it, or bulb. The ones closest to the main stalk, we call that the first position, all right? The next one out, second position, and so on. All right, now you can age cottons just simply by looking at where the blooms are and how many are below it and above it that haven't bloomed yet. It's going to start at the bottom of the plant, and the progression of blooming is going to move up that main stalk from branch to branch and then further out on those outer positions. So you can see, let me find it here. All right, that one is a bloom tag. It's a little difficult to see, so I'm going to highlight them here. So that's a bloom tag, meaning it bloomed 2 days ago. This one's pink, it's withering down, it likely bloomed yesterday morning. And then that one, you can barely see it there, but we call that a candlestick bloom. It's just one that hasn't opened yet. It will likely bloom tomorrow, all right? So if we're only comparing first position bulbs of the plant, you go from node to node, adjacent nodes, they're about 3 days difference in age, with the older ones being at the bottom. Now, the fruit that are on the same branch, so here you have a first position, second and third. The difference in age there is about 6 days, all right? So you can see, you can do the math real quick in your head. You should have multiple blooms all over the plant at any given time. It's going to be at the bottom at first, and then later in the season, you'll see it blooms kind of just across the top of it. And that's where we are right now for most cotton fields in North Carolina. So I do get questions all the time about, have they bred the nectaries out of cotton? My cotton doesn't seem to produce as much nectar anymore. And there's some truth to that, but there's not some truth. So I talk to cotton breeders with all the seed companies quite a bit. And when I ask them that question, most of them don't even know what a nectary is. Like it's of no consequence to them at all. All right, so some varieties we do have on the market that are commercially grown now have very good nectaries on them. They're very distinct and large. And then some have just one good one and a couple of poor ones. I've seen it where the nectaries are not clearly defined and they're real tiny, all the way to having none at all. All right, which got me, as a beekeeper, got me a little interested in this. So we were part of a project. I collaborated with some folks, some former colleagues of mine in Georgia, on a USDA project looking specifically at this. And what we found was interesting. So right at first bloom, so that's 60 days after we plant, those blooms are at the bottom of the plant, so they're a little difficult for a bee to find. You can't just look across the field and see them very easily. But even the droplets per flower and the total volume per flower, very, very low at first bloom. And we're only looking at blooms. So when we first look at it at first flower, the nectaries aren't very clearly defined. A lot of them don't have any nectaries at all. By the time you get to peak bloom, which is about 3 weeks after first bloom, it picks up quite a bit, all the way to the end of the season. That we call cutout. That's the very end of the season. That means the highest bloom on the plant is blooming right out of the top in that terminal bud right there at the top of the plant. And it kind of marks the period in which upward progression of blooming is essentially over. It can bloom out on those outer positions for a little while longer, but usually when it reaches that cutout point, that marks the end for most purposes. But all the way to the end, the volume and the number of droplets per flower kind of hit its maximum. All right, so now they're looking at flower density and just overall nectar production, same thing. It's going to be fairly low right at the start of the bloom period, but it does get better as time goes on. So when we talk about different varieties, yes, there are some that produce a lot more nectar than others, whatever reason. All right, the breeders don't seem to even consider that at all when they're breeding for higher yields and things of that nature. Fiber quality is a big push right now. But you do see, even at peak time or prime time, you got to keep in mind the scale changes a little bit as we go through the season. So these figures are actually higher than those, all right? But even so, we see quite a big difference in nectar production, or just the amount of active nectaries amongst these varieties. Now, with that said, last year, I made a very good cotton honey crop, and the variety that was planted right around me was this one right here. So one of the lowest performing ones. So my point is you can still make a great honey crop on some of these varieties that produce a low amount of nectar. So I was kind of surprised by that. This year so far, I'm going to be disappointed, I'm afraid. I'm actually surprised. We went into the bloom period in a bad moisture deficit. We were very bad dry in late June. And it picked up substantially since then. So I would really have my hopes up, but last weekend when I checked on them, I was quite disappointed because we're getting at the tail end of the bloom period now. And I don't have very much in there. I don't know why. I haven't gone and looked at the field, but there are multiple varieties planted out there. My theory is, every year that we have a dry June, a hot, dry June, this seems to happen. And I don't know if it's because their brood box that would normally be full of honey is just been almost depleted. So then when I put the honey supers on when cotton's blooming, they probably spend a good amount of time repacking that and not really messing in the supers too much. That's my theory. And I don't really know the answer to that. Cotton also has leaf nectaries. All right, so cotton leaf kind of looks like the palm of your hands. If you kind of turn it over on the back and that tendon right there on your middle finger, just look at it like you would a cotton leaf. If you go about 1 inch up on that middle one, you'll see a little bump there, and that is a leaf nectary. Almost every variety has them. All right, there was one a few years ago that didn't have them at all for whatever reason. And that was just an easy way to identify that particular variety, but every variety since then that I've examined has those leaf nectaries. And so cotton's got a ton of leaves on it, of course. There's no rhyme or reason that I can decipher on when honeybees want to work the leaves and when they don't. I've tried to trace it or track it based on weather or the type of leaf, whether it was high in the canopy or low. I can't make heads or tails of it. All I know is some days they're very actively working the leaves. Other days you can't find one under a leaf at all, for whatever reason. But it is another source of nectar, even when blooming is over and things of that nature. So on a cotton plant, we've got two kinds of leaves. One is called a main stem leaf. It's gonna be joined at the base of where that node meets the main stalk, where you have a reproductive branch. You'll have a main stem leaf. Its primary job is to feed that developing branch, as well as moving other resources up and down the plant. It's gonna have a very thick petiole, and it's usually gonna be a real large leaf. The other type of leaf we have is called a subtending leaf. And everywhere you see a bulb developing, there'll be a leaf coming off that branch. And its primary job is to feed that developing bulb. Now that can change over the course of the season. So like now, at the end of the season, your bottom leaves, they're not very active because they're getting shaded out. Your upper leaves are always going to be your most active ones, and that's about what we're left with at this point. But they all have those leaf nectaries. All right, switching gears a little bit to talk about insect pests in cotton. So cotton is touted to be an entomologist's dream because it attracts so many insects. And we have a lot of insect pests in cotton. I'm just going to talk about the primary ones. The first one is what we call thrips. They're a little flea-like insect that really only affects cotton when it's very, very small, in that seedling stage. Once we get about 4 true leaves on it, we don't really worry about thrips anymore. For whatever reason, the thrips are still there, but they're not a problem. You know, when the cotton is very young and just barely trying to grow, it's a pretty weak plant when it's small. Those thrips will feed in that terminal bud, and if they chew up those leaves, they can really take away a lot of yield from the farmer. But once they get to about 4 leaves, whether the plant just starts outgrowing them or what have you, but you can find thrips on the cotton plant even now, but they're not a problem at this point in time. So for us as beekeepers, they're of little consequence because when the grower has to treat for those, that's not a time where thrips or where bees will be actively seeking out cotton. All right, that's early in the year. You've heard of the Neuse insecticides. It scares everybody, and it's made a lot of press time. A lot of the Neuse are used for control of thrips. So it's not really in a case where bees would be actively going after cotton specifically. All right, the next one is Orligis insects, also known as plant bugs. That's a real genius name. I don't know who came up with that. Anyway, that's what they're called. This one is a growing problem for us. It's a real big problem in the Mid-South states, and it's a growing problem for us. They're very mobile insects. They may not be here today, and then tomorrow they'll show up in big numbers and take away a lot of yield from the farmer, and they do it very, very quickly. They're a little bit aggravating. They get resistant to different insecticides very quickly too. So we encourage growers to rotate the insecticides that they're using and wait to the end of the bloom period to use some of the harsher ones that tend to zap the whole system. But you don't want to use the same thing over and over. Just like what we do for varroa mites. If you use the exact same thing over and over and over, guess what'll happen? And that's a bad day when it does. Bollworms right now are not a big problem. Every few years they'll kind of rear their ugly head and do some major catastrophic damage. But most of the cotton varieties we have now have a BT technology. They produce their own BT protein toxin, which is a natural toxin found in the soil essentially everywhere if you were to try to isolate it. but the plant produces its own in this new technology. It only targets caterpillar pests, and they have to actively feed on it for it to harm them. And really what it does is crystallizes their gut, okay? So it kills them at a very early stage. When they get resistant to it, that's when they're a problem nowadays. And every now and then you'll see a resistant population kind of swell up. Luckily for us, though, as beekeepers, the chemistries that we target those caterpillar pests are only going to affect those caterpillars. It doesn't really affect any other insect. Stink bugs, they can be a problem. They're a consistent problem, but they're very easy to manage in cotton. Now, all the ones except for thrips that I mentioned to you, the first generation of every single one of them comes from corn. It always starts in corn, and they'll complete one generation there and then move into cotton. And so if we could get rid of all the corn, we'd have it pretty easy as cotton growers, we assume. But anyway, corn is a big host for a lot of these insects. There are some insect pests of cotton that are beneficial to us as beekeepers. One is aphids. Now, aphids can exist on any plant. You've probably seen it in your own gardens and things like that, but they'll be in very high numbers, usually on the underside of leaves. We don't like to spray for these if we can help it. For one, they're difficult to control with any kind of insecticide. But two, the best remedy for aphids is rainfall. So if a grower has irrigation capabilities, that's normally what we tell them to do, is irrigate to alleviate some of that stress. Essentially what they'll do is gather on the bottom of the leaves and just suck all the juices out of the leaves. But they excrete honeydew, and bees love it. So you'll see bees working the leaves all underneath. It's real sticky underneath there too, but you will see honeybees working it. Incidentally, one of the beneficial insects we have are ladybugs. So when a grower calls me and says he's seeing a lot of ladybugs, I'm telling you, look real close because you probably got aphids in pretty high numbers, and that's usually what that means. So we have this beneficial insect out there that we want to preserve, and that's another reason we don't really want to spray for this particular insect. So most folks don't really understand, there are economic thresholds, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the decision to spray or not is based on the science. Okay, so the insect population's got to reach a certain level to justify the cost of spraying. So a very modest sized cotton grower nowadays is 1,500 acres. Some of these insect sprays can cost $30 an acre. Do the math real quick on that. They don't want to do that if they don't have to do it, is my point, all right? They can cost them big. Some people are scared of the insecticide work with any crop, especially on cotton, because it does attract a lot of insect pests. But in eastern North Carolina, which is where most cotton is grown, we have an asset here. If we look at it the right way, we have an asset that folks in Raleigh or further west don't really have. And that's a good summertime nectar flow that can last up to 8 weeks if we have a decent year. That these other places just don't have. So if they miss the spring flow or don't have a good spring flow for whatever reason, that's it for the year. We've got a second shot at it, and another opportunity for other things like splitting and increasing our colonies, things like that. So in a good year, we're going to have up to a 7 to 8 week bloom period. That's usually going to start around early July, depends on the year. Usually we'll go through Labor Day. Now, a lot of times, dry conditions in the second half of August is what cuts it short. It certainly did last year. All right. The prime time for nectar activity or nectary activity on these cotton blooms, the textbook says 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My experience has been a little different. There are some years I'll see it where the nectaries are way more active early in the morning. It's just bleeding a lot of nectar then. In a real hot, dry year, that's typically what I'm going to see. simply because by noon or 1 o'clock, a lot of those little droplets are just gonna evaporate if it's real hot, okay? Other years I've seen it where it looks like 11 to 1 o'clock is kind of the prime time. Every now and then I'll see it where it's that late in the afternoon, but in my experience, that's been very seldom. The pollen we talked about, honeybees don't really go after it. They're not really attracted to it for various reasons. But the nectar is good. Cotton can be a great asset if we approach it the right way. And a lot of times a simple conversation with the grower, offer them a jar of honey at the end of the year, something like that. And a lot of times that's all that needs to be done. But if, there are people too, if you approach them and they get the vibe that you're gonna accuse them of every little thing that goes wrong with your bees, they're probably just gonna shut down and not talk to you, But in my experience, if you talk to them and you're reasonable about it, there's no reason we can't live right next to each other and both benefit and do so very safely. All right, and I'll talk about ways. It's actually very easy to do, in my opinion. At most, when we're talking about these insecticide sprays, your foragers are going to be the one at risk. My biggest fear is insecticide spray drift contacting the face of that hive where they're coming in and out. That's my biggest fear. But my honey hives that I moved to cotton are less than 20 feet sometimes from the edge of the field. They're very close. They're danger close. All right, if something were to go wrong. So the grower, I just ask them, like, if you can, please make your sprays as late in the afternoon as possible. And he does. And not only that, he'll start at the far end of the farm, which he's got to refill several times. But by the time he gets closer to my hives, this is late in the afternoon as he's going to be. Okay? That's a big help. The other thing, the big thing, is please make your sprays when the wind is not blowing right to my hive. And he does that too. And usually this time of year, our windy time is going to be earlier in the spring. This time of year, I'm not saying you can't have some high winds, but most days, I kind of wish the wind would blow because it's blazing hot out there sometimes. All right, so your foragers are really the ones at risk. But a healthy colony will generate more foragers. If it's a strong colony, that's the way it will. But if that insecticide gets inside there, that's a problem. The reason I mentioned pollen here is the likelihood of insecticide transfer back to the colony via pollen transfer is very low for cotton, just simply because honeybees don't really care for it. So another thing that most people don't realize is a lot of the insecticides, some of them, we use in an apiary. Anybody use Guard Star, which is permethrin, for hive beetles? That's a pyrethroid. It's got a ton of different uses. All right, it's a very common insecticide. All right, most people don't even realize that. Okay, there are other ones too. All of these sprays are made, I'm not going to get too much into this, based off of research that calculates exactly what this economic threshold and economic injury level is. All right? So that injury level, that's the point at which the cost of doing nothing exceeds the cost of taking action. All right? The threshold is the number of insects just below that injury level. So we want to target our action, our sprays, right before we get to that injury level. Okay? So every recommendation we have for cotton growers is based off of something like this. And again, just the sheer cost of this stuff, they're not going to do what we call recreational spraying. They're way expensive. All right, so a lot of these insecticides do have a pollinator section on their label that discusses what can and can't be done. All right. Some of them are a little more liberal than others in terms of what they allow and what they don't. Some of them, if you really read the label, there's absolutely zero time all year long that you can effectively spray and it still be efficacious. Okay. Most of you are familiar with all these resources, Bee Check, etc. Your inspectors through NCDA are very good. I mean, they're just top-notch folks, very sharp. I really appreciate mine. It'll take time to teach you things, just little tricks and something new all the time. I love it when it comes to do my inspections to sell bees, simply because I just like to let them talk. And I always learn something from them. So, I mean, this is something you'll never quit learning. I can promise you that. But there are ways to protect yourself against these sprays. So I borrowed this from NCDA, and this was their numbers. They didn't have the final confirmed cases for 23 at the time when I got this from them. But this is the total number of cases that were suspected insecticide kills for bees, because they're very responsive. You do need to let them know pretty quick. If you suspect an insecticide kill, I would contact them right away. Don't wait 3-4 days. At that point, they really can't help you. They have to collect the cadavers and do residue tests. To do that, they need to do it quickly. All right, so these are the number of suspected cases and the number of actual confirmed cases, okay, for whatever reason. You can see a big difference there. So there's a lot more suspected than actually are, okay, or can be proven. So most of you have seen this. This is on NCDA's website. Here are your pesticide folks. You can contact them too. I would start with your bee inspectors. They're all going to be very responsive, and they're going to talk to each other when they come to do these investigations. So I wouldn't delay. I mean, that's the number you can call, or you can find all this on their website, different links. But if you do suspect one, that's the right action to take. Before you go say anything to the grower, I would do this first, because there are other reasons that bees die suddenly. All right? Sometimes we don't admit it, or sometimes we don't catch it. All right? But there are other reasons, so you want to make sure you do that first. All right, so in my opinion, there's no need to be ultra sensitive about insecticides when it comes to raising bees. We've got to be careful, we've got to be conscientious of it, but we don't have to be ultra sensitive about it. All right, there are ways. Some people have tarps and nets that they'll throw over their hives when spraying is going on. That can be expensive and inconvenient, but it can be done. I've seen people do it. One I don't recommend is closing off hives. If you do that, I would only do it if you had screen bottoms and a very well vented top. But I would be scared to do it even then. With the temperatures and humidity reaching what they can reach in North Carolina, you got to be careful with that.
That burlap orders out of mine, turn the sprinkler on, close mine up when you're cutting all the way around.
Yep, that's a perfectly acceptable way. I don't ever close mine off. What I try to do is position those hives where they're not facing the field. Okay, just face them a perpendicular, different direction than the field. And just a short distance away. If you're 50 yards away, I'd say that's more than enough. If you can be on the other side of a hedgerow, I wouldn't worry at all at that point. All right, then I would still have that conversation, so please don't spray when the wind's blowing right to me and that kind of thing. You need to do that. But this is what I've always done, and I have yet to have any kind of problem. It's really as simple as that, in my opinion. I'm not saying you can't have a problem. You certainly can, and there are confirmed cases every year. But it's an easy thing to manage, in my opinion. All right, here is if you want to really look this up, this is called the RT25. Has anybody ever heard of LD50, lethal dosage? What is the amount of any kind of product required to kill 50% of the population of whatever you're investigating? So this is a similar number for honeybees. It's called RT25. And if you look up that website, every insecticide is on there. And a lot of them, well, some of them we use in cotton, some are not used in cotton. It would surprise you though, especially the very common ones, how short that RT25 is for a lot of problems. Some of them are 24, 48 hours. Occasionally you'll see one longer than that. Usually, most of them are gonna be like less than 4 or 8 hours. Wow. So if they make a spray in the late afternoon, in a lot of cases by the next morning, when bees are gonna become active again, those insecticides don't really have any effect on them. There's one called orthine that we use for thrips primarily, but we can use for plant bugs too. And it's known to be real harsh because it just wipes out anything that's there. Every insect, beneficial, good, bad, what have you, all right? But it's very short-lived. And I actually caught 2 years ago, I caught a swarm on a cotton plant that was sprayed that morning with that stuff. And I don't still have that queen, it's been a couple of years, but I've still got that colony. I mean, that colony, you know, swarms generally are gonna be very productive when you first get them. So, you know, my point is that particular product is very, very short-lived, and that tends to surprise some people. Every pesticide label you can imagine is gonna be on the cdms.net. You can search any product by trade name or chemical name. The big problem I think we have that everybody's aware of them, some people do something about it, and that's varroa mites, okay? I'm not saying every problem in bees comes from varroa mites, because there are other problems that can happen. But I have a lot of customers every year, they all know about them, but I call it the life happens syndrome. They get the bees, they're excited about it, they want to know when to do their checks and stuff like that, and then life happens. And I'll usually get a call in October or November saying, would you remind me on when I need to start looking for varroa mites? Well, several months ago. So this is something I can even improve on this. And it's difficult for me to sample every colony that I have. It would take a whole weekend just to do that. I usually don't sample the whole apiary, but I'll sample a good number of them. And alcohol wash is something everybody can do. And actually, 2 years ago, I started giving an information sheet on how to do an alcohol wash for everybody that bought bees from me. All right, and I now put it on my website that's accessible to customers. The big problem I think we have in cotton, where when we don't make good honey, is because of drought. Now this is a severe case of it a couple of years ago, but it can happen at any given time. So not only are there many sugars being produced by that plant, that plant's going in protection mode. So it's not gonna grow anymore until that drought's alleviated, all right? It's not gonna be producing much sugar. And when this happens, especially on a short plant, it's, you know, it only has a handful of fruit on there. It's not gonna be setting anymore until that stress is alleviated. This happened this year when we have a deficit before blooming. It starts blooming way too short. So if we're not careful, it will start reaching that cutout point where it's blooming out of the top real quickly, sometimes within a week. The only way to save it is to get rain the minute it starts blooming and keep getting it for quite a while. Luckily, we did this year. All right. But if we don't, even if we had a couple of weeks of bloom and then it dried out again, it'll stop blooming right then and it's game over. And that's not good for the grower or anyone else. This was an article, I just took this picture out of Cotton Farming Magazine. This is a publication that goes to cotton farmers all over the whole country, specifically about pollinators. So they're not, the reason I show this is they're not gonna put something in there that a farmer isn't interested in. My point with all this is farmers, a lot of them grow crops that absolutely have to have pollinators, okay? Cotton doesn't, and the jury's out a little bit on that, but for the most part, cotton doesn't need pollinators to be successful. But most growers will grow a crop that does require pollinators, so they're not out to just kill bees if they can absolutely help them. So I get this question a lot: do bees benefit cotton? And if you read the research, I'm not going to say honeybees, but what I'll say is bees in general. There is some literature that suggests occasionally they can see a yield response by having a high presence of pollinators. Usually they're not gonna be honeybees, because honeybees could care less about cotton pollen, all right? But it could be pollinators in general. But anything that affects honeybees will also affect all these other pollinators, and vice versa. My personal theory is why do we seldomly see these positive responses? Well, occasionally, it could be high temperatures early in the season, it could be plant bugs, anything that interferes with pollen development. And so the flowers aren't producing the pollen that they should. So anytime we're in a deficit like that, I think the presence of pollinators could, in theory, improve that situation. But the literature is not very clear on that. Now, cotton farmers and honeybee keepers have one enemy in common. Does anybody know what that is? So cotton's harvested nowadays in these round bales that's held together by plastic. There's no string in it. If you tear that plastic, it's like popcorn. All right? Bears, yep. So, fun fact, in North Carolina, we have, really in 3 counties, the highest concentration of black bears of anywhere else in North America. And I always found that interesting. That includes Canada and all these other places. There are a lot of bears in eastern North Carolina. There's some right around here. Most people don't know that they're there. That's probably a good thing. But one good way to find out if one is there is to have some beehives. I've seen them where they'll just be out of curiosity, walk around them, not really mess with them, but they will hit you. And I have been hit 3 times. 2 of the times, well, 1 time for sure was my fault completely, because they were not at all protected. The other time, well, my fence was down, a turkey flew through it and busted some of the insulators. I knew about it and just ran out of time and didn't fix it. And lo and behold, I got hit. It's a pretty ugly mess when they hit you, I will say that. What's that?
I keep my fence high.
Yeah, so electric fence is really the best remedy for that, in my opinion. I use a thin wire, something like a 17-20 gauge wire. You want something in that'll work in that fur. And I also run, I use metal T-posts, and I run a ground wire from post to post. And I found that out the hard way too. If you hit that ground wire and a hot wire, it will knock you senseless. Way worse than just grabbing the wire. Did that by accident. So I said, if it hurts me like that, it hopefully will hurt a bear like that. Some people will smear some peanut butter. I don't want to do that because that attracts them. But if you do that, you make sure it's working, because you want to make sure he's hurt. And I have seen them dig under. What you don't want is for them to get the taste of it. Then they'll work harder the next time. All right, so some things to do that I think are important in or around August. If you're around cotton and it blooms all the way to Labor Day, you can wait till then. Some of it's about over with now. To harvest your cotton honey, okay? Feed if needed. That kind of goes on into September and October. I tend to get more aggressive than that in October, if I need to. This is the time of year or your last chance really to combine and cull some colonies, maybe potentially requeen. You might have usually after Labor Day, they get real difficult to find. So if you're gonna requeen or make any last splits, a split this late can be a gamble. I have done it, and I've done it successfully, but it's not really for everybody. But if it's time to requeen, I would do it here in the next 2 weeks, just simply so you can get a queen. Hive beetles, you take care of them. Varroa mites, I would hope everybody's already done that. Usually late July, I'll kind of hone in on that time. So I'm hoping, most action has been taken for varroa mites, but the reason I wanted to put this up here for August is, yes, monitor. Well, I encourage new beekeepers to do that at least every other month throughout the whole year. Treat, which hopefully we've already done, but this post-treatment monitoring, all right? That's another lesson I had to learn the hard way. All right, so a lot of these treatments only work 70–80% of the time. in a good situation. And so you'll have, 20% of your colonies where it didn't seem to work at all. Well, then now you've got mite bombs that can spread throughout your other hive. So the only way to really catch that is a post-treatment alcohol wash. Make sure your treatment worked, don't just assume that it did. So I think that's very, very critical. And it's getting about time I'll probably be doing mine in 2 weeks when my treatment's over. So that's all I've got for you, and I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
So I have bees on watermelon.
Okay.
And I typically will lose about 40% pollinating watermelon. And I was in Maryland at EAS this past week, and one of the guys from Kentucky said that he'll usually lose 60%.
Wow.
In
Really?
watermelon. And it's lots of things, like they're sprayed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So your boxes are always missing tons of foragers.
Yeah.
They'll build up super fast and swarm, and then they have trouble re-queening because, by then it's, later in the year.
Right.
And then the other thing is unlike cotton that's blooming and blooming and blooming, watermelon blooms and it's over.
Mm-hmm.
So then your bees, go hungry.
Yeah.
So do you know how much, what percentage of bees you lose on cotton?
On cotton?
Mm-hmm.
I've never lost any on cotton that I specifically put on cotton. But incidentally, I do pollinate some. I've never lost any on melon. Now, I don't let out many just simply because that is a risk. I only let out 20 or 30 at any given time for pollination to any specific location. And I will never go more than half of what I have. Like say I've got 2 growers that need 30 or 40 each or something like that. I rarely am gonna give them that many, but I'm not gonna use more than half of what I have at any time with any grower. So for that reason, for the simple risk of it, because it can be risky, and I've heard of some losing them all. And I certainly really cannot afford to do that. But I've never lost any on cotton. Now with that said, I'm usually moving a dozen or so specifically to cotton where they're close enough to be impacted by it. I've lost more in other places due to just no nectar flow at all, like the dry June we had, for example. Made a good spring crop, but when it dried out, it did it bad, at least with my bees are. I mean, killed clover, everything, nothing at all with clover during that time. And yeah, I'll have some starve or get real close to it during that period. So in your case with melons, I don't know. I really don't know what to tell you, but I don't put out that many on melons. The thing I see most people doing is that when they're putting them on melons, and I understand why, they're putting them right on the edge of the very edge of the field. So that interface with the spray can be danger close for sure.
Yeah. And I'm probably only losing 40% because mine are up on trailers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not palletized on the ground, so they're much higher.
Right.
Which is probably why I'm not losing as many as most people that I talk to.
Yeah. I never like to see people losing bees. I just don't. But for pollinating, that's the nature of it.
Yeah, pollinating's tough.
It is. A lot of people think you make a pile of money doing it. That's not.
If you still have something to bring home.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir.
Okay, you were talking about selling cotton honey. How do you keep it from granulating? Because cotton honey is notorious for granulating real quick.
Yep, it is. For one, you really want to make sure what your moisture level is. Your moisture, if it starts fermenting, that starts that granulation as well, and then the two just kind of compound each other. So you certainly don't want to be too high moisture. And I have had a problem before with cotton that was way high moisture, like 22, 23% when I extract. And you gotta get that out of there, and so right now, I keep everything in 5-gallon honey buckets, but if I keep it in a somewhat confined area and run a dehumidifier just around the clock and stir it twice a day, I can usually bring that moisture level down pretty quick, usually within a week's time, depending on how much I have. I can get it right down to where I want it. So 18.6 is the requirement you hear about. I like mine in the 17s, preferably in the 16s, if I can help. So that's the first thing. The second thing I do is keep those buckets on a heating pad. It really just keeps it a few degrees warmer than room temperature, but it does warm it, and that is a good way to keep it from going into crystal form. You can flash heat it. You don't want to heat it excessively, but you can flash heat it. And a lot of the big commercial guys, I would not recommend this because it's very expensive, but they'll send it through like a tube that heats it up instantaneously to 160 and then immediately cools it. So it's not zapping the enzymes like people think it would. It's not like you're boiling it, which you certainly wouldn't want to do. But you can flash heat it up to 120. I've heard the inspectors say even 130 and just immediately cut it off and move it into a cooler environment. And it won't destroy the enzymes, and what that does is melt some of those mother crystals that may be in there that you can't see, and that will keep it from progressing a lot further. Now, I'm not saying it won't eventually crystallize, but that'll, at least from the start, it'll give you a good window of opportunity to consume it or sell it or what have you.
Have you ever considered using the crystallization as an asset? In other words, turning it into creamy honey?
I have, but for me, it's about number 25 on a long list of real good ideas. And I'm getting older, and I've got a lot less time than what I used to have. So I'm not looking for anything more to do. That's just the truth. But yeah, no, it is a excellent resource for that. Matter of fact, if you go to some European countries, in some places, liquid honey is just an abnormal oddity. Like they have nothing but cream honey in a lot of places. So, here's kind of the opposite. But in some of those countries, that's the way it is. All good questions, though. Any other? All right. Well, I've got a few cards up here.
Thank you.